Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Andy, and today with us we have Fred Karger. All right, so welcome. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. My name is Fred Karger. I'm a Nutrier class of 68, the first graduating class from Nutrier West. I went to California after college at the University of Denver and moved to Los Angeles. Ended up as an actor for 3 years, and then followed my true passion, which was politics. Became a political consultant, partnered in a firm called the Dolphin Group, where I spent 27 years of my life. I retired in 2004, so 19 years ago. A little bit lost on what I was going to do with my remaining days, but I said I'd want to do something significant. Didn't no idea what it was, and probably the last thing I ever thought I would do would become an LGBTQ activist. But in 2006, that's what I started to do in my town of Laguna Beach to save our historic gay bar, the Boom Boom Room. And then in 2008, stepped it up when Proposition 8 to take away marriage equality in California was on the ballot. And I became very active in that effort, trying to target the big donors to the other side. And that led me to a variety of things, including being the first openly gay presidential candidate from either major political party in 2012. And since then, I've remained an activist doing some boycotts and keeping pressure on some of the adversaries of equality.
Yeah. So from your perspective, how has misinformation impacted political campaigns and the political landscape overall?
Well, there have always been, you know, people misrepresenting themselves in politics. I think every state has some kind of ethics office. The federal government has the Federal Election Commission. So when there are um, lies told and crimes potentially broken, that you have to go to those organizations, and that's a great recourse, and that's what I've done very successfully. But obviously, the misinformation has gone to a new level thanks to Donald Trump and some of his followers who can say and do anything they want with impunity, and that's a huge problem. So it's sad to see because politics is something I've spent my life doing. I pride myself on honesty and integrity. And when others have fallen, and how some of these politicians and consultants can do the things they've done has always been amazing to me. But generally, they get caught and punished, and that's how the system remains somewhat honest and clean. But it's still the best system in the world. And with our bumps, we managed to get through it like we did through the last election cycle. We'll see what happens next year.
Yeah. So, as an LGBTQ plus rights activist, can you talk about the role of misinformation in discussions around that topic and how this impacts the community?
Sure. As an opposition research expert, as I mentioned, I've been in political consulting for 27 years. Many of those years, we're doing what we call oppo research, looking into the opponent's record, finding out some potential information that might be helpful in order to tell voters some of the problems with these candidates. So I was pretty prepared in my life as an activist then from my career. And so one of the first things I did was in Prop 8 was to follow the money because we were doing selective boycotts of some of the biggest donors to take away marriage equality in California. And these were people who had given $100,000 or more, which doesn't sound even like that much anymore. Billions being floated around, but $100,000 to a political effort, particularly 15 years ago, is very significant. Some gave a million and a half. One of the big organizers of that whole effort was the Mormon Church, which I barely knew about. And they did a big effort in trying to do a very stealth campaign to raise tens of millions of dollars from their members to manage the campaign, to do phone banks, to bus people to California, spending money on websites and commercials and all these various things. Well, I realized after the election was over and we lost, and marriage equality was yanked away from us after having it for 5 months, that the Mormon Church had not been factual in reporting all that it had done. It had only reported $2,078 that it spent with all the undertaking that it took in California. So I did a lot of research, spent about a 2-week period, just hunkered down and found about 13 causes which would contribute to election fraud. I filed a complaint with our state elections office, the Fair Political Practices Commission in California. They agreed to investigate for the first time they've ever investigated a religion. It was big national news. New York Times even did an editorial commending me and commending the Fair Political Practices Commission. And of course, the church's response was from their spokesman in Oakland, California, which had been the epicenter of their organizing, looked right into the camera of Channel 7 News and said, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints spent $0 on Prop 8. So that, of course, was quite alarming to me because I had discovered just the opposite. And after a year and a half of investigating, the Fair Political Practices Commission came down with a ruling, first time against a religion, on all 13 of my charges. They were fined, and they were under all kinds of investigation and document searches and everything. So the FPPC, the acronym, was able to do this. So when I saw how they would just lie about something like that, I started to really dig into their past and all these other election activities, which led to a treasure trove of documents that were given to me at a bar in Salt Lake City by somebody I've termed Mr. X because he'd asked to his name would never be revealed. And then I discovered hundreds of other lies from this church, from the organizations they'd set up, like the National Organization for Marriage, which I filed a complaint against with the state of Maine ethics office a year later after Prop 8, which they got up. Even Brian Brown, who was the president, and this John Eastman, who was one of the leaders of the insurrection, who were there, and they both lied and said that they had not laundered money as I had suspected they had. Well, after a 5-year investigation and millions of dollars in legal fees to that organization, which basically bankrupted them and they're out of business, they were found guilty on all my charges there. They paid a record fine of $50,000 to the state of Maine, and they just continued to lie and cheat and steal every step of the way in every single one of the elections they're involved with. And I'm thinking in politics, particularly with watchdogs out there like me, because none of the LGBTQ organizations have dared to go after our opponents, which is politics 101, that they would clean up their act, but they haven't. And it's very disheartening. So we need to really keep a watchful eye when there is this misinformation, disinformation, outright lying, election fraud, and make sure that the governmental bodies take action against these organizations. They think they're doing it for a higher purpose because most of these organizations, if not all, are extremely religious. Many of the National Organization for Marriage members are very strident Catholics, often Opus Dei members. They're very extreme members of the Catholic Church, and they feel they can lie without any consequences because they're doing it for their Heavenly Father, whomever. So that doesn't fly in politics and in a democracy. You can do whatever you want in church, but you certainly can't take that message out to the general public, particularly during our electoral process, and lie and cheat and steal. And when they do that, Fred Karger is there to keep a watchful eye and take them to the necessary governmental agencies who can then take severe action against them.
Yeah. So, how can we combat like misinformation within political debates and especially regarding like human rights and like social issues?
It's a tough one. There's the freedom of the press, there's the First Amendment, but you cannot hide donors' names. You cannot blatantly lie and get away with it. And so it's important that these watchdog organizations, and there are many out there that do keep an eye on these people. There's an organization called Media Matters. They monitor not just LGBT but everything on right wing radio. And when there are lies told, they blow the whistle on them and you know cause embarrassment, make them apologize, whatever. And so there are many people out there doing that. It's important that we do that. We're in a democracy, but we need to really watch what is happening. And we're going to see it in spades in this presidential campaign, particularly on the Republican side, because you've got Ron DeSantis, certainly Donald Trump is not a truth teller. And these other candidates who are going to be very desperate are going to be doing a lot of lying and trying to convince the people and voters that they are honest, but they're not. And so we will watch them. And hopefully this is a cycle that will pass and candidates and politicians will be held to a much higher standard in the future.
Yeah. And what do you think of like the invention of like technology and social media and their impact on like the spread of misinformation?
Well, that's kind of the culprit, I would think, in many instances, although so much of this comes right from the candidates' mouths or their campaigns via commercials or press releases. But it's something that it's hard to control. It's part of the freedoms we have that you can do and say anything on social media. There were some there was some policing of that going on Twitter, and there certainly is on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, I think. But it's hard with millions and millions or billions of subscribers that they can really watch that. But it's that some of these organizations that are watching the presidential campaigns, I think, have a great responsibility to make sure that as much truth is told as possible. So I love to support those organizations and help out when I can.
Yeah. And so what's something like a regular person can do in their daily life to make sure they get the correct information, especially political information, and yeah, and avoid like misinformation?
Well, it's very tough, but we're all taught to be honest. I think in school, certainly that was one. New Trier with its honor code. Then they had and everything. It was teaching us to be honest, and that's the way we should live our lives. And so we have little antennas that go off when somebody is not being honest with us. And so that's the thing I think we need to really look for. You get a sense when I'm looking at a campaign report or I'm hearing somebody testify at a hearing, I can tell quite often when they're not being forthright. And that's when you have to then go to your laptop and do some research and try and prove that they're not telling the truth and call them out on it. And that's the thing. And a lot of the LGBT organizations I was referencing before, they really don't do anything as far as taking action against any of this information. Need to step that up and not just research it. Some of them spend millions and millions of dollars researching all the lies that people tell, that organizations tell, to tell their donors about it or their board about it, but they don't take action. And that's what I have done and paid consequences for that. This national organization I mentioned, which was set up by the Mormon Church as a front group for Prop 8, and then in other campaigns like Maine, they subpoenaed me twice in two federal lawsuits that they had filed. That's a pretty scary thing. I didn't even know how to spell subpoena. They didn't teach me that at New Trier, but it was a very frightening exercise to go through and a very expensive exercise to go through. And I obviously knew that when I did go after these massive organizations like the Mormon Church, that there might be consequences to me. They're not happy at being called out and forced to be subpoenaed by their state agencies investigating them. So, they wanted to strike back at me. And I'm sure there are a lot of meetings. What do we do with this Fred Karger? Do we sue him? And I think subpoena was something that's much better than getting sued because, you can fight a subpoena, which I did the first time. Second time, I was unable to. The National Organization for Marriage had sued the IRS, which had mistakenly released some information on some of their donors. I took that information. I wasn't given it. I didn't know anything about it, but I took it to, again, our state ethics office because they hadn't reported these contributors. And I filed another investigation request and complaint against them, which the FPPC did. And, that's how they responded, was to subpoena me. So I had to testify. And actually that John Eastman, the chairman then of the National Organization for Marriage, he deposed me in a deposition that I had to do. I had to hire my own attorney. I had to turn over every single email, every single voicemail and text, and every file. Back in 2008, 9, we had a lot more paper files and everything. It was a massive job for me to go find all this information. And this John Eastman, who of course has refused to turn over his emails or files or voicemails or texts after having been starting this, encouraging this insurrection with Trump. And that's the kind of price that I paid. And I got through that one. There was one news story about our deposition said he was befuddled, which he was. He's a former law school dean of Chapman Law School and professor, and supposedly this revered constitutional scholar. Well, he ain't. And he gave Trump very bad information and advice, so much so that they told him he better lawyer up, which of course we're seeing now. Right now he's going through a trial at the California Bar Association. It's taking many months because they wanted to spar him. I had filed a complaint back in 2012 with the California State Bar Association. They didn't act on, and 2 other state bar associations and the American Bar Association. So these are the kinds of things you can do as a citizen when you smell something that isn't right, and you actually have evidence and proof and a very good suspicion that laws have been broken. Then you can take those to government agencies. Certainly you can take to social media and do things. People think they're going to turn the world upside down by putting a comment on someone's post on Facebook, but it takes a lot more than that. And that's where the real research and digging begins, and talking to people, and people will open up and you can find out a lot of useful information. Matter of fact, I'm heading to Salt Lake City next week to continue my research project on the Mormon Church's tax exempt status. Since I started that 9 years ago, a lot has been uncovered. I had filed a complaint against one of their holdings in Hawaii, $100 million a year theme park that has never paid a dime in taxes, even though it's a very profitable operation. But somehow on their tax returns, they always show a loss, which is hard to imagine. They have free employees, they've got very low overhead, and it brings in all this money. So it's hard to see how these organizations can do this. But the Mormon Church has been very fraudulent, as we've seen. There's a big piece on 60 Minutes from a whistleblower. So you've got to dig in if you have the commitment and resources and time to really find out what is wrong, what is potentially illegal, and then take action against these individuals or organizations. And I love to do that because it needs to be an honest political system and tax system in this country. Just because you're a religion, if you have investments that are businesses like the Mormon Church does, they have to pay taxes and report their finances. But again, they think they're doing it for a bigger purpose, for a Heavenly Father, and that they can get away with it. Well, we've just seen the Securities and Exchange Commission fine them $5 million in their investment fund because they hadn't reported any of the $100 billion they have in stock. And so, that is illegal, and they were called out on it. They got a small fine compared to the duplicity over 20 years that they did in not reporting these funds they had. They had shell companies set up with people, very low profile people heading them. And it's a great news story that was in the Washington Post. This David Nielsen, who had worked for this Ensign Peak, their investment fund, blew the whistle on him, and obviously suffered tremendously as a result of that, but was able to expose them, and hopefully they'll be more honest in the future.
Yeah. All right. So those were like all my like main questions. Do you have anything else to add? Before I have just like 2 questions, just like for fun.
No, it's fun. I of course proud alum of New Trier. My brother went there. I'd gone there. I have lifetime friends I made there. I loved the whole experience. It was very tough because I was gay, but I had to keep that deep, dark secret for my 4 years. I did a pretty good job of it, I think, but it was just very, very, demeaning to me. I had very little self-esteem. I went back probably 7 or 8 years ago and spoke to the LGBTQ Alliance, which was a pretty packed room at East or what do they call it? Not East, but
The
original
Winnetka,
campus. Sorry,
the Winnetka campus.
Winnetka campus. I suppose the Northfield campus. We called them East and West. But yeah, that was just an amazing experience. Because if there'd been something like that when I was in high school, and it's very courageous of people to go to these meetings because you're basically outing yourself, even though they're private, but it's a huge step to take. So to be able to talk to people and tell them what I had gone through, how I had suffered through high school and college and many years after. And so anything I can do to help people live their true and authentic life and lives when they can, I'm happy to do. So I commend everything that New Trier does and a great school system like that to help people who might be a little bit different, but they find their own path. There's so many activities, there's so many wonderful people. It's gotten to be far more diverse than when I went there, and it's great to see.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely been some more like equity things going on in Nutria, which is really nice. And yeah, and I'm on student council and I'm on like the equity team. So we've been doing that like monthly observances and stuff like that. So yeah. Um, and yeah, I just have two more just short questions. What inspires you in life? Whether that's like a person, idea, book, etc. And do you have any advice for teenagers?
What was the first part of the question?
Oh, what inspires you in
Oh,
life?
inspires me. Um, that's a good question. I guess the fact that I had to live such a closeted life for so many years. When I started my effort to save our historic gay bar in Laguna Beach, there was a documentary made about it called Saving the Boom on YouTube by a great filmmaker, John Keitel, who we took it all over the world. And I have a line in that where just, one of many questions. And he said, I said, yeah, I'm angry. We're fighting back. And that's the thing that really kind of the light that went off for me is that, you can just take it as I did. As I said, no self-esteem growing up because I was so scared of this deep, dark secret I had being gay. And so I took that anger and disappointment with myself and put it out to others because they're individuals and some religious organizations that continue to do that, to demean people, to make them feel less than. And so that anger that I had and held in me for decades came bubbling to the surface, and I've used that, and that's a continual um, inspiration for me because I hear so many horror stories from younger people. I go to Utah, and it has 6 times the attempted suicide rate by teenagers of any other state, which has to tell you something because it's a predominantly Mormon state, and so it's that church that has these terrible, terrible beliefs that they impose on their members, that you can't be gay, you can't get married, you can't do anything, and so you will ruin your family's afterlife if you're gay, and not just your immediate family, but hundreds and hundreds of family members, cousins, and great great grandparents, and all that. So what are kids to do? They're told they're better off dead, so they kill themselves or try to kill themselves. So when I see these stories and meet these people, hear these stories, see these people, I'm inspired every day to fight for them because often they can't. And so, I'm 73 years old. When I started doing this, I was about 56 years old. So it took me quite a while to publicly fight back. I'd always been doing it through my checkbook in the 1978, an initiative in California to ban gay and lesbian teachers in California, which was the first vote of that in the country. We ended up defeating that. And, these kinds of things come up, and people need to step up, not just those affected, but people who believe, in doing the right thing. So I see people every day, a lot of younger people that really inspire me that are doing this now. That, I'll ask, oh, when did you come out? You come out in high school? And they go, high school? Nobody waits till high school anymore. And so that's the kind of thing that really makes me feel good, because the battles we fought to normalize being LGBTQ plus have paid off. And it's been pretty quick too. I mean, there's been a lot of pain and suffering for hundreds of years. It wasn't even that long ago. If you were openly gay or lesbian, you couldn't work for the federal government, and they had investigators tracking people's lives to get them fired and go to prison or whatever. So that was in the 50s and even into the 1960s. So, we're talking 50, 60 years ago. You couldn't even get a job with the federal government. Now we've got our next president of the United States, Pete Buttigieg, who is openly gay, married, and has 2 kids. And he's going to be in the White House after Biden. And he is the Secretary of Transportation and doing one hell of a job and a great role model. I mean, I can't imagine being a kid and having an openly gay cabinet secretary as smart and able as he is. Just a perfect kind of role model. So it's changing. Take a few steps forward, and we get one back. I'm obviously very worried about the Supreme Court. It's now made up of, thanks to Trump, of religious fanatics. They don't believe in the Constitution. They believe more in the Catholic Church and what the Pope tells them to do. And that's a huge problem. And we saw it on reproductive rights right out of the box as soon as they had that majority. And we're going to probably see those battles come forward on LGBT rights. Fortunately, the Senate and House passed bills last fall, the Respect for Marriage Act, to really kind of enshrine marriage equality into the country's laws, signed by the president. I was at the signing ceremony at the White House, quite a proud day. And having run in the Republican Party, where most of these problems start, it was great and very inspiring to see 12 Republicans in the U.S. Senate vote for this, and 47 in the Republican members of the House of Representatives. And in politics, people will do the safe vote. If they know they need 10 votes, 10 Republican votes in the Senate, well, that gives 10 people the obligation to do it, but it doesn't give any more. Well, there were 12. 2 other people did it just because it was the right thing. In the House, they didn't even need any Republicans, but they got 47. So, the things are changing on LGBTQ rights, hopefully some other rights, and things are going to get a little better. But it's going to be kind of a bumpy road for the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Um, so yeah, I think that's it. That's all I have. And
All
thank you
right.
for your time and insights. Um, yeah, thank you.
Great. Go Trevians.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Nice chatting. Bye.
Mhm.